Now at 82, Mick Jagger has finally opened up. And when he talks about Brian Jones, it's not just a memory. It's a wound, a regret, a story of loss that never really left him. For years, fans speculated what really happened between Mick Jagger and Brian Jones. The stories are legendary: the jealousy, the rivalry, the fame, the music, and the silence that came before Brian's tragic death. But it's only now, in the twilight of his life, that Mick is admitting what he really did and what he didn't do. Brian Jones was more than just a bandmate. He was the founder of the Rolling Stones. It was his band before it was anyone else's. He named them. He picked the members. He booked the gigs. And in those early years, it was Brian's vision that set the tone. He wasn't just talented. He was magnetic. Sharp suits, blonde hair, piercing eyes. When he stepped onto the stage, people couldn't look away. But that light didn't last forever. As the band rose, Brian began to fade. Slowly at first, then all at once. And behind that fall was a storm of pressure, pain, and neglect. Mick Jagger now admits that much of it happened right in front of him, and he did nothing. Mick and Brian had a complicated relationship. They were close, yes, but there was always tension. At first, they were allies. Young, hungry, passionate about blues music. But as fame arrived, so did cracks. Mick became the frontman. Keith became his songwriting partner. And Brian, brilliant, moody Brian, was pushed aside. Brian wanted to lead, but the spotlight didn't follow him. His ideas were often ignored. His songs were rarely chosen. And as his influence in the band shrank, his confidence did too. Mick now admits that during this time, they all saw Brian struggling. They just didn't want to deal with it. He was unpredictable, Mick said recently. He could be difficult. But looking back, I think he was just in pain. That pain only got worse. Brian's use of alcohol and drugs increased. His mood swings became more intense. Sometimes he'd vanish for days. Other times he'd show up and barely speak. He was drifting, and Mick, Keith, and the others were busy chasing success. Brian became the problem no one wanted to solve. Mick now confesses something heartbreaking. We wrote him off, not because we didn't care, but because we didn't know how to help. We were kids playing grown-up games with real consequences. In 1967, the band was arrested for drug possession. The media went wild. The pressure was immense. And through it all, Brian seemed to unravel further. His romantic relationships were stormy and often abusive. He was arrested, hospitalized, and written about more for his meltdowns than his music. By 1968, it was clear Brian could no longer function in the band. He was barely playing on the records. The other members were frustrated. And then, in June 1969, they asked him to leave. Mick says that moment still lives in his mind. Sitting across from the man who started it all, telling him there was no room for him anymore. He looked at me, and I'll never forget it. There was sadness in his eyes, but also something else, like he already knew. Like he'd been waiting for it. Brian agreed to step away. The official statement said he wanted to pursue his own musical direction. But behind the scenes, it was clear he was being pushed out. Less than a month later, he was dead. July 3, 1969. Brian Jones was found motionless at the bottom of his swimming pool in Sussex. The official cause of death, drowning. But the questions have never stopped. Was it accidental? Was someone else involved? Had he given up? Mick Jagger says the truth is something simpler and sadder. He was already gone before the water ever touched him, Mick says. He'd been drowning inside for years. The death shook the band. But they didn't stop. Just 2 days after Brian's funeral, the Rolling Stones played a massive free concert in Hyde Park. Mick wore a white outfit and read a poem by Shelley in Brian's memory. Butterflies were released into the sky. It was a tribute, a farewell. But some fans said it felt too soon, too polished, too professional. Mick now agrees. We should have taken time, he says. We should have paused. We should have grieved. But the machine kept going. And we went with it. Over the years, Mick rarely spoke about Brian in depth. There were nods, brief comments, the occasional tribute. But the full emotion, the guilt, the sorrow was locked away. Now, at 82, he says he's ready to tell it. We let him down, he says. There's no nice way to put it. We watched him fall and didn't catch him. He remembers Brian's sense of humor, the way he'd smile when the music clicked, the intensity in his eyes when he found a new instrument, the joy he had when the band was just beginning. That's what stays with Mick now. Not the headlines, not the chaos, but those small, brilliant moments before it all went wrong. And then there's the guilt. I think about it all the time, Mick says. What if we had pulled him in instead of pushing him out? What if we'd been kinder, more patient? What if we'd stopped the show and said, let's take care of him? The what ifs are heavy. And at this stage in life, they only grow louder. Mick says he's tried to honor Brian in private ways. He's visited the grave. He's spoken to Brian's family. He's kept photos, letters, pieces of music that never made it to the public. He says those are the reminders, not just of who Brian was, but of who he could have been. There's also the music. Brian's fingerprints are all over those early records. From the haunting slide guitar on No Expectations to the sitar on Paint It Black to the dulcimer on Lady Jane, he gave the Stones a sound no one else could replicate. And yet, for too long, those contributions were overshadowed. Mick is now pushing for that to change. He was a genius in his own right, he says. He wasn't just the guy who started the band. He was the sound, the soul. And people should know that. Mick's out front, shaking his hips, stealing the spotlight, and Keith's right there with him, writing songs that are climbing the charts. But Brian, he's starting to fade. See, Mick and Keith had this new plan. They wanted to write their own music, not just cover old blues tunes. He's also begun supporting documentaries and books that tell Brian's story more honestly, warts and all, but with heart. Because, as Mick says, the truth is the only way to heal. For us, for the fans, for Brian's memory. And maybe that's what this is really about. Not just confession, but healing. Because when someone dies young, especially someone as bright and troubled as Brian Jones, their story becomes frozen. A myth, a legend. But behind that myth was a real person. And behind that person was pain. Mick Jagger is finally shining a light on that pain. Not to relive it, but to release it. Because sometimes, the only way forward is to go back. To admit what we missed. To say what we should have said. To look into the past and whisper, I'm sorry, Brian Jones will never come back. But maybe through these words, through this honesty, his spirit can finally find peace. And maybe Mick Jagger can too. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please share it. Let the story of Brian Jones be remembered for what it really was. Not just a tragedy, but a lesson. A call to listen. To care. To notice when someone is slipping. And to reach out before it's too late.